Namaste and good evening, everyone. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste. Happy to be with all of you.
We are happy today to continue the 7th installment of our special theme, how to carry our current growth of consciousness into our next incarnation in deliberately. And usually you may post questions during this conversation in the chat box on YouTube, or you may send beforehand your questions at our email ID, integralstudies.in@gmail.com. And we will take a first question, which derived from the last few sessions from Sun 0716. In reference to Evenings with Sraddhalu 236, regarding harmful effects of drugs, psychedelics, what about medical drugs, narcotics that sometimes need to be taken to alleviate surgery pain or other pains and illnesses? Do they also open up the portal to lower vital worlds? Sometimes the doctor insists pressure to speed recovery, even if one is unwilling. So if they do, does this open to the lower worlds? How to safeguard oneself or others, like those under your care, especially if it's a child or elderly?
It's an important question because the kinds of chemicals used are very similar to what they call recreational drugs. But there's a big difference. In the recreational kinds of drugs, the primary effect, which is why it is used for recreational purpose, is not a total numbing, but of opening through the senses to the lower vital worlds. Whereas the medical drugs used for purpose of removal of pain or to put you under a general or local anesthetic is much more limited in the scope, in that it separates the subtle body from the physical by disconnecting the linkage in between. That's how it creates numbness in the physical. Or it completely puts the entire subtle body into a state of sleep or separation from the physical, which, equivalent to sleep, would make it effectively in a state of loss of consciousness of what happens to the physical body. So while it has an effect in the subtle physical and opening in the subtle worlds, it's not as dramatic, it's not as dangerous. Nevertheless, the effect is there. During that state where there has been a separation, if in the subtle body there is a weakness, let's say there is a hole, there is a proclivity, tendency to attacks because of that, then the person would be exposed to the attack and might be in some kind of danger. I'll share with you an incident which was narrated to us by one of the very early disciples of Sri Aurobindo. And we are fortunate that we were able to take his interview and a few of these very early disciples, because they passed on soon after, within a couple of years. He was one of those who was there from a very early period in the 1930s, even maybe in the 1920s. It was, I think, perhaps even before 1926, before Sri Aurobindo withdrew from active surface contact with people. There was an incident where a local person's daughter, was somehow very close to Sri Aurobindo, and the mother used to come often and would be very attached to them. And so, obviously, seeing a certain spiritual potential, the girl was cared for by Sri Aurobindo and the mother. At some point, the parents took her for some surgery. She had something on the head, and they did a surgical intervention and removed it. Now, I do not know where exactly the damage took place, whether in the removal of that by the use of the anesthetic, or in the removal of that some imbalance was triggered. From that point on, so first, as soon as that was done, the surgery was completed, they informed Sri Aurobindo and the mother after. And the mother was very upset. She said, "Why didn't you take our permission first?" Because they saw that there was a certain danger in that thing, because she had a certain opening, a weakness. And it seems from that point on, the girl began to have epileptic fits regularly. Epilepsy, as you know, from an occult point of view, is attempted possession. And as the external influence begins to try to engage with the hooking into the physical nervous system, the body pushes back. That's the what we call the fits and the excitation of the nervous system. So it's obvious in such a case that the girl had a weakness somewhere. Something specific to that surgery which was done exposed the weakness, and subsequently the protection, or the normal biological natural protection, was broken because of that. I do not know what it was specifically. I don't want to speculate, but I give this as an example of how what would seem like a normal medical procedure involving such anesthetics or interventions, to a person who had an instability already, might trigger a more serious problem or open to a more serious problem. So from this, I'll come to an example which was my own experience. I had to go once through general anesthetic, and I had a friend who had been through it many times, who gave me a certain preparatory advice, saying that it's going to be a very interesting state, and if you prepare yourself for the transition and the return, you might have some interesting experiences. So I'd already decided that I would concentrate to be in connection with the mothers of Sri Aurobindo's presence, even locate myself in Sri Aurobindo's room or something like that. So I'd give two examples. One was local anesthetic, but the surgery itself was in a state of, while of local anesthesia, it was extremely uncomfortable. The body was extremely cold, under continuous pain because of the setup of the machinery and things like that. I think it was surgery in the foot. But at that time, my entire consciousness was fully concentrated, as if in Sri Aurobindo's room. I was hardly aware of the body. It was local anesthetic, but nevertheless, that was a different experience. But during the general anesthetic, it was interesting. I had prepared myself to try to make a conscious transition. And when the nurse put the oxygen, let's say, on the nose, the mind was distracted when she said, "I'm putting oxygen." And I said, "Ah, yes." But the mind momentarily shifted there, and I have no memory after that until I woke up. At the moment of waking up, there was nothing in between. It was a blank. It was going blank and then waking up. At the moment of waking up, I had an exact sense of how much time had passed, which I then double checked. It was exactly that. So that shows that some subliminal layer was actually tracking time. But this surface layer, as if just blanked out and popped out. And there were certain interesting side effects of that. It's as if the pure physical consciousness was brought forward and the mind consciousness was separated from it. A gap was felt, although I was able to function. The gap took a few hours to fully, let's say, generally settle, during which time the body was living its own life, as if. And it was like a baby and responding like a baby. It was feeling somehow lost, needed to be touched, like like a mother would console a child. And it was very interesting to see that. And the mind was there, and it was looking at this and saying, "Why is this happening? What is this happening?" But what was interesting is something closed after a while, let's say over a few hours, but not fully. For the next 3 days, there was a gap still at a level where I was normally unconscious of the body awareness, body gradation, of tissue substance consciousness. But because of the separation, it's as if the part of the mind which was embedded there had been partly withdrawn. That was the cause of the numbness, but it was partly withdrawn but had not fully integrated. So I was able to feel the pure body tissue consciousness shorn of the mind by itself for about 3 days. At the end of that 3 days, that integration was fully completed, and then I came to what would be the normal experience. Let's say you become conscious of your hand. You're actually not conscious of the tissue of your hand. You're conscious of the content of your mental body infused into the physical, or the part of the physical that becomes of the quality of the mental and joins with the mental, which turns to the physical. That's the grade, generally, where you're conscious when you say, "I'm feeling my hand and its sensations." So it could be any of those gradations depending on the kind of training and refinement of your senses and so on. But it's generally in that realm, which is primary of a mental grade in the physical. Okay. But because the separation was there, I could actually feel the physical body as a lump of meat. And at night, during the sleep state, I was conscious of the world which corresponded to that, which was a really, really not nice world. And I was fully conscious, or half conscious, let's say, in that state, in that world state. And on waking up, there was this slight shift to come to a more mentalized grade of my conventional normal consciousness, habitual state. But I was still conscious of this layer of the physical, which was different and disconnected somehow. So I'm just giving this as an example of how, although a general anesthetic may have been used for a few hours, its consequence lasted several days. And at that time, one would have been, because those layers were separated, one would have been vulnerable to influences on that grade. So this is making as a general statement. If there was a weakness, that weakness would have been exaggerated or exposed, and so on. Now, the particular drugs or narcotics used for removal of pain would be too narrow and limited in their scope to perhaps give you a major danger. But if it is in a location where you already have a weakness, again, there could be a momentary risk and so on. I'm just giving you the whole logic of it. Once you understand the logic, you'll figure out on your own where it is relevant, where it is not. But it's not, it's very different from what are normally used for recreational drugs, where you are opened through the senses. Here, the separation is done so as to close the physical senses, and some part of the subtle physical or vital body is then separated. There have been many cases of people under general anesthetic who found themselves out of body and floating above the physical body, and later narrated what they saw, heard, and even sensed of the thoughts of the doctors and nurses around, even seeing things of the room from top and so on. So it shows that there is a, if you have already that tendency to be able to separate, that might happen also. As such, though, generally speaking, most of them would not be too dangerous. But once you understand the principle, you can also see where one could perhaps come under some kind of danger. Generally speaking, the environment itself is somewhat clinical. And if there is some support of the doctor's goodwill and advice before to put you in a positive direction, then one would mostly have no problem at all. Some help from the family and so on would also make a difference. Generally, I would say there's no need to worry unless you already know or have some major instability in some part. You would not be exposed violently to the lower vital voids. The drugs which would do that, each drug has its own, let's say, grade of access and opening. Those types generally are not used for medical purposes because they are destabilizing. For medical purpose, you want stabilizing, numbing, etc. And so the focus is very different. You can go to the next question.
We have two questions related to Mark's Tempest. First, from Divya. I have always been closely following every Saturday session, and the ongoing topic is very, very interesting indeed. And I'm always immensely grateful for the contents of this channel. It's been a few days since I'm deeply engrossed reading Tempest. It has been an overwhelming experience. Through and through, I have a doubt regarding the context of future that Mark mentions in the chapter of his next birth on page 183, where he very specifically writes that facts mentioned as will happen in parentheses will definitely take shape, and the ones that he does not see happening will not. Then he goes on to say that it is not a possibility, but a certainty. He also mentions in the previous paragraph that the question about possible futures in infinite possibility is rather a tricky concept and fundamental flawed, and he would rather not go into its details there. I'm having trouble in understanding this concept? Does this mean that our every choice in infinite freedom will ultimately converge to make platform for the lines of reality that Marx has seen to manifest? If this is so, then what is the significance of the infinite possibilities that arise every moment and are given to us? Do they have a significance? Do they not affect the future at all? Why does Marx say that the concept is fundamentally inaccurate? Is there a better, a more synthesizing explanation from Marx's side, which helps us better into understanding this conundrum? Kindly shed some lights on this. And the second question from Ankit. In Mark's second book, there's a fascinating episode where he foresaw one of his future incarnations in China and briefly described how China will become the globally dominant superpower. I'm curious whether he discussed anything with you regarding India during that time and how the supramental consciousness or Yug Harivatan, as described by Sri Aurobindo or Pandit Sri Ram Sharmacharya, is unfolding during that period. I wonder why his soul does not seem to make a conscious decision to be part of this movement, or whether he is unaware of the changes prophesied to occur on earth by our saints.
Both of these questions relate to Mark's description of how he is already aware of the next life and particular details which he narrates in the book of the nature of earth life at that point and the world as it is. He says, have to happen. It's not a possibility that he's seeing, but he's seeing the certainty of those things. So first is Divya's question of, does that mean we have infinite possibility and we are exercising those, but somehow each of those possibilities has to converge to make for that fixed outcome? And Ankit's question around that is, well, why isn't he, Mark, talking about the great change of consciousness, supramental consciousness, or a new yuga which begins, etc.? Why isn't he, or is he not aware, or is he not participating? So both of these questions are important, but I'll take up Ankit's question first about why he does not speak about that. You must understand how this works first, the future life scene. This is something I've seen from two people. I mentioned this before a few sessions ago, in Dina's description and in Mark's. In both cases, they had spontaneous recall of past lives. And first, when I heard Dina say, I'm actually beginning to feel and see my next incarnation, which interestingly for her also she describes as being in China. And she said, I'm so surprised, I'm quite shocked about what this is. Mark had a similar experience when suddenly the memory of the next incarnation came, and he linked actually to his incarnation traveling above the spot where he was physically in this life. And a link formed, and there was this memory and the awakening of that. So Mark is very clear that as he's experiencing many of these things relating to time, he says, I realize that what I know about time is less and less, that there's so much more to be known. Now, all of these confusions would naturally occur if we do not have a larger background. That larger background we find in Sri Aurobindo, where he tells you of the nature of the freedom of infinite possibilities within the totality of Brahman, which is the cosmos, the one that is the all that is the one. In that totality, every single possibility exists simultaneously. First, you must understand this. Every single possibility that you could imagine, you can imagine because in the Brahman consciousness, it is already existent as a possibility or as an experience in the totality of that whole. Just this idea is so mind-boggling. Imagine, for example, right now, as a possibility, one of the possibilities is one wall in your building just changes color, vanishes, a dragon appears flying in front of you. Anything you could imagine, and the millions of possibilities right now in front of you that could change, all of those are simultaneously existent in the totality of Brahman as possibilities. Or as if A part of Brahman consciousness is experiencing each of these as a reality of its own self-delight. It is delighting in, I could be this, I could be that, I could be that, I could be that, and I am all these already simultaneously. Of these infinite possibilities, a certain number of possibilities then are put forward and allowed to engage with each other, forming as if an interaction of these possibilities. Each possibility is unique and separate in itself, simultaneously present. Now you're bringing them by concentration of awareness into alignment with each other and sequencing them as if this leading to that, to that. And that sequencing in the Brahman consciousness is what we experience as the movement of time. That interdependence woven in the Brahman consciousness of these possibilities now interacting and, so to say, like gears engaging with each other, is what we experience within this play as the separation of space. So as I am driving, a car comes from the other side, which I did not know would be coming. But the car has already started coming about an hour before. I'm going in my car, that car is going. If you could see from, let's say, space or great height of a few kilometers, you would see that car on the highway, you would see my car on the highway, and you would say, ah, yes, 1 hour down, these two cars will meet, or they will pass near each other. Isn't it? If at that time you're seeing more than just the location of the car, you're also seeing the psychological states, then you might say, oh, this driver is in a state in which he is vulnerable to not being aware, he's too sleepy or whatever else. Or even in the interconnection between these two energies coming, the energy behind the car, there is already an entanglement which has formed, which then, because of the entanglement, would time the two cars to a point where it might lead even to a bump or an accident or some interaction of some kind. All this you can see 1 hour ahead, isn't it? Because you're seeing levels of interactions, and it is this in the totality of the Brahman where the connections of various possibilities are being placed into each other. This is a very complex idea. The flower exists by itself. The tree exists as a whole by itself. But the flower then, in the relationship in Brahman consciousness, joins to the tree and then seems to emerge from the tree. But it exists in itself, is entirely Brahman, even as tree is entirely Brahman, even as mountain is entirely Brahman. But the relationship is set in Brahman of tree emerging out of mountain soil. So these relationships are what create for us the sense of space and extension of space, and the unfolding of the sequencing is what creates for us the sense of time. Okay, get this generally speaking. We don't go into detail, but once you get this first glimpse, the whole unfolding sense of past, present, future becomes now clear. In the past, let's say you are looking back, something happened, but everything else that did not happen but tried to happen is simultaneously present. So in the totality of Brahman, not only what happened, but everything that tried to happen is there already as past. In the present, you might say we are right now doing this and watching this video or talking about this theme. But in the totality of Brahman, everything else that could have happened is also simultaneously present. But only this is as if focused upon by the unfolding of the cosmic consciousness. It is this focus of the cosmic consciousness that is driving the flow of time, so to say, which is described in the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad as the horse, the divine horse, which is moving forward, and as if the unfolding of events, which is caused by this energy. What trails behind the horse is the past that dies away, fades out as if. And what is forged ahead in the horse's seeing is already there in a way. Now comes the future. Every possible thing that could happen is also simultaneously present, even as the present, as the past, everything is present. But because certain energies are already in motion, and because there is this entanglement, as I said, between events and chains of events, because of the current chain of events, there is a specific chain that is already formed stretching into the future. For example, you have released so much plastic into water and soil. Well, 100 years down, that plastic will still be part of your food chain. There's no way you can remove it. I mean, you can, the processes you need to set in motion to remove it will then take several years, and in the result will take many more decades. So at least during that period, it is fixed that the plastic is out there and is affecting human life. As a consequence of the plastic being there, human life force in body, at a cellular level, is meeting the plastic, and the life force is pushing back. How will it push back? In the only ways that it would know naturally, or the innovations which it can develop, which also can be foreseen. Not only they're foreseen because they're interlocked, interdependent, they have patterns which exist from past, but also a sense of unfolding time can be given, but not always precisely. So one can say somewhere around this time, when the pain of the plastic pollution becomes too great, people will suddenly wake up, and a reaction will begin, and an action, some kind of coordinated action all over the planet might start. Somewhere around here. Now, the around here is not in terms of time, is in terms of chains of sequences. When this chain leads to that, which leads to that, which leads to that, that's when it will happen. Each of these chains can be as if stretched or compressed by events, by circumstances. And that is where you again have a freedom. So first recognize, when in the question which as it was asked by Divya, she says in every choice in infinite freedom has to converge to that. No. The point is you don't have total choice in these matters. The plastic being already out, what can you do? Well, your choices are already limited. The fact that certain events have already happened, your choices have been limited. So right now you don't have infinite choice. Your choice is reduced. Within that, you can modify things. So again, when things are seen ahead in this vision of the soul, again, I'll come to link it to Ankit's question when he says, when this future has been described by Sri Aurobindo or Pandit Sri Ram Sharma Acharya or others, Swami Vivekananda, he looks at China and, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact words, but he says, the dragon is sleeping, let it sleep, because when it wakes up, it'll shake the world. Something like that, he said, some comment he made of this kind, as others have seen. Why? Because those chains are already in motion and the consequences are in place, already in the unfolding of events. You can see it. So the moment you shift your poise physically, as you say, you go up a kilometer, you'll see all the cars for a range of a few hours away. In consciousness, when you go up, you'll see the chains which have already coalesced to specific outcomes, but the timing may still be flexible. And there, although you do not have infinite possibility in terms of the freedom which you can exercise, you can still exercise the freedom to shorten the pain and make the changes happen sooner, lessen the pain as a result, or delay, increase the pain and make the consequences more difficult. That is your choice. So let's say a person has committed a crime. The crime committed under accident or ignorance has now been covered up. The consequence of that as forces will always create a huge pressure for the person to face the consequences of the crime, well, depending on the circumstances he's in, either to get arrested or to be criticized socially or to have to face a penalty of various kinds. He can delay it. He can hasten it. He can even avoid it entirely by a major shift in consciousness, perhaps. But those forces are in motion and you are dealing with now a complex mix of forces. In certain cases, the consequences are set in time also, broadly again, on a broad level. Those consequences which do not belong to somebody, or let's say a collective choice, which may vary, but belong to your personal choice, those can be foreseen with great accuracy. So when Mark describes being born in China, he does not give you an exact time. He gives you a broad range. I think he says 2.5 centuries from now, about. But what will be the form of his body? Generally, he can describe that. The relationship with his parents, he can describe that. Because those things are in a narrower scope where individual soul freedom has a greater power than the collective compulsion of other people's choices. But what will be the technological development at that point may correspond to a larger collective choice. or even to forces which drive the technological awakening on Earth, which we are not conscious, but these are cosmic forces sometimes which plant suggestions, which plant ideas, which compel the awakening of certain technologies, etc. So, in a sense, if you had the perspective of all forces currently released, including the leeway that they have to adjust, to amplify, to speed up, to slow down, to go off track, and you could see it all, which should be the way the supramental consciousness would see. Then you can say precisely this will happen, come what may, though the timing is pretty much in this range somewhere. These are likely to happen, but with variations in form and degree, depending on what happens in between in consciousness. And the third category is things which might happen if we live by these values, but might not happen if we shift our level of consciousness or live by those values. So Sri Aurobindo describes these three things. I think it is in the Synthesis of Yoga. He says to be able to distinguish between these three already requires a certain grade of consciousness. And we are speaking now of a general perspective of the world events. In Mark's case, what he describes is specific to his soul's choice, where naturally a lot of things are very specific, precise, where it concerns the soul's freedom and the choice he can play with, broadly, again there. Other details, not relevant, and those are open still, they're not fixed. So when you read that, you'll see a certain pattern of what is obviously seen as fixed and what is not. Dates are not precisely fixed, but broadly around this time. That's all one can say. But at some point, he says that person will fly over this and he will experience the connection of the memory. And so in the book, he writes as if he's addressing that person, saying, I'm you, you are me. But when he describes world events, he describes things which are already part of the momentum of collective change. And there he can say China is dominant. It's one of the major world powers. And there's been a major decline within Europe and the United States. You can see those tendencies of decline already. But how much the decline would be, to what extent the decline could be still checked, minimized, all that is left to our freedom. But if you see the force with which China is rising, organized, this is the big advantage of a centrally controlled state-driven agenda. Organized force rising, there's nothing on earth right now in terms of any human effort which has put up anything reasonably strong to be able to either slow this down or limit it. So because you see nothing else, you can say, yes, this trend line is already set. There's an interesting article which I saw. It was in this magazine called Swaraj in India, where they were comparing India and China. And they said, you see, China faced enormous competition. That's why it has performed better and grown faster. India did not have enough competition, so we have not grown, and there's too much inertia, and things have not moved at the pace at which China could. There is a completely wrong reading. The article is written by somebody who's half programmed with certain Western ideas which are only partially true, mostly wrong. And one of these ideas is that competition is good for developing innovation and better results. Half true. So competition can be a useful tool for innovation, but you don't need competition to have innovation. You need freedom to have innovation. What China has done, rather than so the model followed, which is prominently pushed on us from childhood and programmed to you if you have been through an MBA or any kind of business training, and they program you so that you follow in the slot that they have set, is, well, everybody should go out, create your own thing, let there be 1,000 startups, and then there'll be a fight of competition at the end of which 990 startups will die out and only 10 will survive. And out of those 10, eventually only one will survive, all the rest will be swallowed up by it, etc. This is the model they present to you. This is not a sustainable model. This is a destructive model. It does not match even the development within India or any of the old cultures, including Japan, including old Europe, including old United States, etc. You see, in Japan, something like, I don't remember now the exact number, but in the range of 60% of all businesses are older than 200 years. You don't see destructive competition destroying and swallowing up. And there's a huge variety and a rich variety because of that. And there's some 20% businesses which go all the way back to 600 years or something. in family business. So the families are taught to think in terms of the next 3 or 4 generations in their business investments. This is a very different way of thinking, and India was like that until the so-called modern competitive programming has kicked in. What China has done is exactly this. They've knocked out the stupidity of destructive competition. And in the state control, the state says, and you have to have a benevolent state and visionary state. If state is benevolent, visionary, centralized, then everything's fine. What it did was it triggered free development of thought, supported and assisted and helped those to coalesce to form strong, powerful entities. Not a destructive, not that somebody has to lose so that someone else can gain. Let all the best minds come together and build the best. And if someone has a different idea, fund that separately. And those who are more aligned to that can work, and they collaborate constantly. This is how nature grows, by collaboration, not by destructive competition. And if India had followed a collaborative model instead of destructive competition, which is innate to the temperament of the culture, that would have made India a leader. So this whole mentality of imitating the West is completely wrong. China is following a very different model by looking at what is their civilizational need and thinking in these terms. So digressing, but I'm showing you this, the way it has been organized itself. There is nothing right now matching it. And if India comes up later, it'll still take a while. If you see where things have been started by the Modi government, they'll take another 5 years to fructify. Modi started things about 10 years back, which are fructifying today. So there's a lead time, a lag time. China started those 30 years ago. So China has a lead of 30 years practically. Nevertheless, the trend lines set in motion now. It's obvious what is fixed, certain, inevitable, what is but not always fixed in time, and then what is somewhat mixed. And it does not require a very high supramental poise to be able to perceive this. Just the soul's vision is enough. And so that's what Mark is able to describe. But coming to the Ankit's question about what about India then? And this was a question many of us asked him, and it has been recorded. When we post that, eventually you will have the full discussion there. He said something to this effect, that what he sees, and it's again what the soul memory of the future retains, it's not that everything's known. What he sees there as the future is that India is the center of the world for the spiritual consciousness and the spiritual development. And China has the power center, but the spiritual center is in India. And then he ended the conference by saying, you are in the right place if you're seeking the spiritual development. And there are other comments that he had made, which also we will eventually put out. So it's clear he sees that also. That's part of the inevitability of the future. Specifics of details perhaps are not known to this memory, or he chooses not to say. In the book, he tells there are many things which he is aware of, which he chooses not to say, for reasons which are obvious. One is to protect himself, but also because sometimes speaking of things prematurely can also create more difficulty and disturbance. So there are choices that he has made about what he would reveal or not. I think this answers both questions sufficiently. We can go to the next.
We have a question from Gilbert. What about walk-ins? Do souls make an agreement before birth to allow a walk-ins? Yes. Do souls make an agreement before birth to allow a discarnate soul to enter the physical, mental vehicle of an existing incarnated soul?
Okay. So this question came also in the comments from last time's video, perhaps the same person. Walk-ins, we have spoken of some sessions ago, maybe a few months ago, but in the context of what we are currently discussing, we can briefly touch this. That there are cases, what they call a walk-in, that another being walks into this medium's body, speaks, does something, and withdraws, or stays on. And as usual, with all the clutter that comes with the New Age, there are many groups or teachings which encourage you to become vehicles for walk-ins or to become mediums and things like that, as a way of helping humanity, because some higher soul will work through you, and so on. Be very careful about such stories. Do not believe them. They are all spread by vital beings whose interest it is to mess around it with human life or to feed on human energies. So none of these have any spiritual value, with a few rare exceptions. And so I'm going to look at that as a rare exception for the question that Gilbert has spoken of. So let's assume the bulk of what passes as walk-ins are not so. They're merely mediumistic vital beings taking some possession, partial, temporary, of human interests and human affairs, messing around and then withdrawing. There are actual cases, and very rare, where there might even be an agreement between two souls to share a body, even to take turns. Very rare. It's not that all possessions are such. I would go so far as to say, out of 1,000,000 possession cases, one might be such where there's actually two souls which are sharing, and by some deliberate intention. Or they may take turns. One side engages and experiences the life, the other passively participates, and then they switch. And such would be some of those genuine cases of walk-ins. Or in very rare cases, again, 1 in 1,000,000 of this kind, where a soul might align with some other higher being and say, all right, I have prepared the base for you, now you take over. I think in that discussion, I had mentioned reading somewhere an article that said Madame Blavatsky's was one such case where some higher being took over, did not want to go through the struggle of taking birth and growing up and all those difficulties, which are not so nice for beings of the higher world. They would rather just do their job and get out. So mostly what they do is they align with the existing human being in thought, in emotion, in energy, in inspiration, artistic quality, infusing it through the person to manifest partially. These are the alignments which we would call some kind of a vibhuti, one of the types, two types of vibhuti. But in rare cases, one soul might build the body. When ready, the other one comes in and takes over. Now, what happens to the first soul does not mean that it exists. It may still stay participating from behind as a passive participant, or it may choose to leave also. It's entirely dependent on the nature of the relationship. But in most cases, what is reasonable and helpful is to stay participating so that it benefits from what is being brought in, as well as the other benefits from having saved its time, but the other one is allowed to grow at the same time and not have to lose everything which was prepared. These are very rare in actual cases, and sometimes there can be an agreement made in advance. But just saying that it's a rare case, I will still highlight the fact it could be 1 in 1,000,000 or even more rare. But yes, everything is possible potentially in principle. We can go to the next.
We have a long question from Maureen, so I will read the first question. He's also expressing, please excuse any lack of clarity in posing the following questions. First, what is the effect of the ego in the past life dimension, given that most humans are tied to a highly somnambulistic present? Shall I continue with the second, or will you like to answer?
No, we'll just read the whole thing.
Okay. Second, if an ego influence exists past life, and if this ego experience helps to determine future incarnations, would the work on the ego be extremely important in the present dimension? And an effort to develop the will and contain the ego would be a major focus in each lifetime? Third question, in any human's development of conscious evolution, would other forces, in parentheses, may be vital to this process? Fourth, in any post-life or OB experience, would the subjective nature of the individual world view trapped in an extremely energetic space and time experience from the construction of these unique experiences and make them highly personal? Thank you for your consideration and development of this series. I believe some of these questions have been addressed in general terms, but perhaps it is useful to go further.
can also take the next question.
From Luke, thank you for your precious series on conscious reincarnation and for your focus on the priority of individualizing our mental, vital, and psychic being while incarnated and on the way to develop it every day. I sense their immense value.
So the common theme for all these questions is about the individualization and individualization of mind, vital, and the psychic. But also in Maureen's, the vocabulary is about the ego and the formation of the ego, which is the surface individuality of the person. So I'll broadly touch upon summarizing across the questions, but this will also be the topic of what we're going to read next in Sri Aurobindo's writings. So many more things would become clear as we read, and for a large part of the chapter itself. So first is the effect of the ego in the post-life dimension, given that most human beings are tied to a somnambulistic state. So what happens, you have shed your body and you are now in your subtle body, and what happens to that ego? What role is it playing? And the answer there would be depends on how much that ego individuality has been aligned to the psychic. Depends on how much that ego individuality is covering up and contradicting the psychic. Depends on how much that ego formation is only superficial or has a deeper root in the inner mind or inner vital and even perhaps the inner physical. So all depends on the nature of that thing which we have put in the catch-all word called ego. You see, the word ego itself is just a focal point of individuality. What kind of focal point is it? If it's literally like if you put a drop of oil on water, it holds its drop as a separate piece. The water itself can be large. It could be an entire ocean and the little drop floating on it. You shake the water and the drop breaks up and scatters. Most cases of ego individuality are of this kind: superficial, narrow, unstable, with no particular cohesive quality that would hold it all together. And in such cases, that ego has zero value when you leave the body. It sheds, it drops. If it's tied to the physical, it's a physical superficial ego, it will drop with the physical ego. If it is a narrow vital body ego, then during the period that you're in the vital body, it would have a certain place, but eventually it would even delay your passage to the deeper and subtler realms because of its rigidity and the time needed to dissolve it to be able to shed it. On the other hand, if in the vital body, the vital ego has been formed, but as linked to the psychic influence and able to express something of the psychic influence, then that ego formation would actually have a long-term value and might be even absorbed by the psychic as a formation of individuality. And so it's the most coarse crust which is tied to the substance of the vital body being discarded. The juicy, soft, malleable, healthy, plastic, light, quality of light of awareness, conscious formation would be, so to say, integrated or held by the psychic. That process of shedding might involve some time of the coarser and cruder, rigid layers, which are no more relevant. And the separation of this would involve some time, perhaps. And a similar thing would happen with the mental individuality and ego sense. A large part of humanity has not even developed a proper organized mind. Now, again, this word ego is a catch-all word. What does it mean? For example, a mental ego. You could have a very arrogant mental poise. How dare you question me? I am so smart and you have no right to. I will hold on to my beliefs whether they're true or not just because that's my sense of superiority or individuality. That's a useless, superficial, crude, false ego. Will have to be shed. But if there is in the mind a clear thought and an organization of all the thoughts around a focal point, and that focal point has a strong psychic influence or an idealistic upward turn or even an opening to the intuition or a spiritual influence as its core, primary driving focal array, then it has something real of an organized quality. Now, you will not say ego, but you'll say an organized mind that will survive. It will be in the after physical death, in the mental domain, something of great precious value. And especially if there has been a unification with the psychic aspiration, that organized bundle of mind would be retained, absorbed and held up, made a part of the psychic personality, made a part of the material and substance to be brought out into the next incarnation, or partially held back to be brought out in some other future incarnation, but it's ready, material, formed, organized. And the essential quality of its organization might be kept, even if the form of organization might be held back, even in the next life. So here you might be, let's say you have developed a well organized power of mind around reasoning, rational formations. In the next incarnation, if the soul chooses to become a musician, let's say going to play piano or some other instrument, the reasoning character would be, so to say, as if held back, but the fact of an organized mind would be put forward. And when this person begins to play music, there'll be a great clarity of mind through which the inspiration will flow. But the form of it will not be rational in a numerical or a left-brained form, but in a musical melody of relationship of notes and sounds and moods and subtle qualities of the musical richness. And there'll be the same organized unit center around it. So, our understanding of what this really means is largely flawed because we still do not have the experience of the mind as an instrument in itself. We are only aware of bundles of thoughts and sequences and organizations or expressions of thoughts. We're not aware of the essential faculties behind which form those thoughts or guide or organize those thoughts. And it is at that level that the soul retains the essentiality of what is developed. So, coming back to the first question of Maureen, the effect of the ego in the post-life dimension, even though you're somnambulist largely, well, you're somnambulist here because there has not been sufficiently organized individuality in most cases, and that individuality has not sufficiently come into itself and woken up. The moment that happens, you're no more as somnambulist as others. At least that's a measure even of the breaking out of their somnambulism. And then that part becomes relevant in the way described in that essential level, if that has been developed. So its influence on future incarnations, which is part of question 2, I've also described. So I'm going to start avoiding the word ego. I'm going to say organized individuality. And the degree of organization will be extremely important for the future, or the way that organization is developed, the faculties which have been organized. And they could be different. You could have developed artistic organization here and then say, hey, for the next, I want to develop rational reasoning powers and organize those and then integrate them with my artistic. There are many variations on this. And so in the second question, Maureen asks, therefore, to develop the will and contain the ego would be the major focus in each lifetime? Sometimes, need not be. So, for example, developing the willpower may or may not be so prominent. It could be a series of experiences which one has, and just the organization of the experiences and the way they are absorbed without a particular assertion of will, or particular containment of the ego sense. Again, I'm being careful not to go with that word because it could mean too many things. Rather, think of it this way: the organization of the experiences in a way that nourishes the soul, that would be the reference. That would be the major focus in each lifetime. Third question is, would other forces be vital to this process of the conscious evolution in human development? Depends what you mean by other forces. So they need not be vital. They can be helpful. They can be not helpful. It all depends on what they are and the relationship. So you open to forces of the vital worlds, and especially lower vital worlds, they would always harm. You open to influences of the higher ranges, mind, even spiritual, they would be helpful. None of them would be vital unless you are in a spiritual journey. then the essential of spirituality is the opening to the higher consciousness, and its influence then working in you would be critical. But other than that, I don't think there would be anything specific that you could say would be essential or vital in that sense. And the fourth question is about what happens when you are after life, you've shed the body, or you are in an out of body experience. Your worldview would create your, so to say, local bubble of experience, to use Mark's vocabulary. And you construct these experiences, or the experience of those worlds you so to say interpret through the filter of your beliefs, and that makes it highly personal. Sri Aurobindo will speak about this in what we're going to read today. So Sri Aurobindo refers to how we pass through this bubble where we have this highly personal preconceptions through which we experience the subtle worlds. So in a sense, they are even our constructions in the subtle worlds. And then by the pressure of the soul, eventually these are dissolved. And after that, we are able to experience the subtle worlds as they actually are in themselves, created, let's say, by a cosmic creative power of the divine. So there is a subtle, let's say, a vital world, a gradation of the vital world. It exists by itself. But in your mind, an equivalent grade of consciousness has created certain formations, let's say from your religion or other beliefs. You aligned with a particular cult group which had created beliefs of what the other worlds are like, and they're strong formations. You pop out of your body, you're in those. Mother speaks of the US President Kennedy being lost in the bubble of his conceptions of the Catholic Christian imaginations of the subtle worlds. And she couldn't cut through it. She couldn't help him to be free of that. But eventually, through the soul's pressure, those begin to dissolve, and you begin to experience the actual worlds of that grade as they are, and then other worlds of other grades, and so on. So there is this transition, yes. But the best would be if from the beginning, you do not create too many of these false mental formations or even vital formations. If from the beginning, rather than constructing beliefs, you open yourself to the deeper truth of those experiences. Allow your mind to become plastic, perceptive without covering the perception with your preconception. And this is a basic training that you have to do from childhood, during your student life, during your adult life. And if you have trained your mind in this way to become plastic, open, receptive, perceptive, insightful, etc., that's what you will have after when you leave the body. And if you have done the same with the vital, that's what you'll have when you leave the body. And if you've even brought this plasticity and youthfulness and bright cheerfulness into your subtle physical body, that's what you will have after you leave the physical body. So in a sense, all that you have there and what you do in terms of transitions, where you go, where you have access to, etc., in terms of experiences and material for future lives, is all based on what you do in your physical life. So in the yoga tradition in India, we are told that even if the gods want to experience evolution, they have to take a human birth. It's not about human body. It's about the physical body and the physical world where you grow. Now, this we have known. We have heard this for years. The mother has said this in as many words that even the gods have to incarnate if they want to participate in the evolution, etc. And I was quite surprised this time when we were in a discussion with Mark O'Byrne, without having read any of this. He said, when he went into those higher regions, he was told by beings of that domain, he was told, if you want to accelerate your evolution, then you have to take physical birth. That's the fastest way of growing in your evolution. He was told by those higher beings. He didn't, I don't know if he has explained or how he has understood it. That's not important. But coming to this idea, why? What difference does it make? So I'll put it from the perspective that Sri Aurobindo offers us. The physical body, the physical tissue, the physical world, physical substance is the world where form predominates and by rigid form embeds and binds everything that fills the form. So the moment you incarnate in a physical body, your spiritual gradations, your mental gradations, your vital gradations, your subtle physical gradations, all that material that you have are all as if bound into the physicality of rigidity of form. Even if you make it plastic, finally it is persistent form. But all these gradations being bound, each of these gradations now enormously influences all other gradations. If you go into the vital worlds, you have a mental consciousness, obviously, but you're primarily living in the grade of consciousness of that world in which you are, with influences of those other gradations that form you. But here, all the gradations are bound together so tightly in this container, which is persistent rigid form, that they almost blend to be as if one. You have the illusion even that your body is thinking, your body is having emotions, your body is feeling, and so on. Isn't it? So because all these are mixed in, the growth of any one will provoke a ripple effect in the growth of all others. And consequently, you're compelled to have an integral growth, integrated growth, because you cannot have growth of one without eventually the other parts either pulling back or being dragged forward, because we're bound in form. Therefore, an incarnation in the physical world, any planet, any type, any species, any gradation which is mental of your grade of consciousness. But incarnation in the physical world is essential if you want to accelerate growth potential with the least effort. That's why even the gods have to take birth in body, in physical body. So the advantage of this is when you make it plastic, when you make up one part of your plastic, when you take the trouble to make the whole of your plastic, then you can experience and wander across all the worlds and have access to the higher worlds, because you develop the higher gradations of consciousness here and integrated them with your mind and the vital, and therefore even with your subtle body and the vital body, you're able to access and ranges, etc. So to put it in other terms, in outer body experience or in post-life state, that is after physical death, the range of experiences you have, the gradations of consciousness you can wander around, and the freedom from preconception and the filters of your rigid ideas, all that, so the freedom from that, all that is what you prepare in your physical world, in your physical lifetime, which gives you all the flexibility of that access there. Of course, that's not the goal of it, but my point is, at the end of the day, you can't say, I'm going to quit the body and I'll have all the capacity. No. You will have the capacity commensurate to your current evolutionary development while in the body. Yes, of course, there's more possible if you're prepared from before or if there is help from above by the grace. But generally, this is the broad rule. So this is the background I wanted to set, and the individualization of each of these with their plasticity and enrichment of experience now makes it critical. So an individualized mind and vital, which is plastic and supple enough to be able to be reshaped. This is one, these are the two essential qualities, and there'll be a third one we will see, which are needed to be able to transfer your full consciousness from one life to the next without losing continuity. So I'm putting in context with our overall theme for this, the topic, and which will be the conclusion of this chapter that we are reading of the Life Divine. But in between now, Sri Aurobindo is going to lead us through so many amazing insights of what happens in the entire journey after death of the body, physical body. But always rationally and with full range of possibilities by touching upon essential principles of what happens. So what happens with that is you have the full picture. Generally, this is the way it works. And then depending on your particular context of development, etc., you can skip stages, bypass things, or have certain flexibilities and so on. You get the full spectrum of possibilities because it speaks and presents things at the level of principles. So this is where we're going to go now with our text. Recall what we read last time. You remember that he said, if you, once you leave the physical body and you're surviving in a non-material body, in the supraphysical experience, then naturally you'll be drawn to the gradations corresponding to your current quality of consciousness, of the gradations of your body, and everything being a major complex. We discussed last time how you'd be drawn to something like an average, but you could oscillate through gradations which are currently developed, individualized, etc. But he says a brief stay may be possible close to the earth domain if there are subtle envelopes of the earth existence which belong to earth but are of a vital or mental character. I think when I spoke last time, I kind of described it the other way, the mental which is materialized. It's actually, he's speaking of the earth material which has a mental character and vital. But eventually those two meet. Physical substance that turns to mind, mental substance that turns to matter, and the two being link, and that's the linkage of these two bodies. That's the linking point of substance, building continuity. But it is this gradation from the physical on which, leaning upon which, and using that substance, that sometimes the soul can stay even in the physical world. In such cases, because it is of a material grade, under certain circumstances, dim light, strong electric field, certain mist-like space where easy condensation is possible with a slight shift of temperature or stress. So when, for example, in the air, the molecules of water could easily condense with a little bit of nudge and disturbance. Those are the conditions in which, if someone is there in this subtle physical body, you will see a form, you'll see an imprint, you'll see an influence, etc. You'll be able to record it as a temperature variation, etc. And those typically would pass off as the ghost or such. Not always ghost. It could be the person itself in very close, but not staying too long. Or they could be sometimes the shells of the subtle physical body hanging around and doing mechanically their routine, or even like an imprint of a recording in the very close to material level, the same pattern repeating again and again, because it's an imprinted whirl of rhythming substance. And it is to dissolve these that we have many of the rituals done in various traditions to free from such tendencies. So that I'm setting aside. It's something we had discussed last time. We come now to the key question. What is this transitional space, state, supraphysical existence that is there? If there is evolution, then there would be stages and gradations of consciousness. If there's no evolution, he says there could be a temporary home of the spirit, which would be the natural sojourn between life and life, unless the person goes back to its original world. Then, so he has taken 3 cases. Like a lawyer, he takes every single case. There are beings who incarnate once from the vital world, go back to the vital world. That's it. They won't incarnate again. And they're not evolutionary beings in that sense. But the other 2 cases we have seen. But why is he taking this case? That what if there's no evolution? So we'll see when we actually read the text that follows. When you withdraw into a gradation of consciousness which is essential, in that state, you can say there is only one psychic world, so to say. And then you can't speak of gradations in the same sense as you would in the vital or mental. And yet there are degrees of evolution, but still it is home, common home, so to say, but different in quality according to evolution. So he's actually hinting you and preparing you for that. But at the same time, he catches a viewpoint that says, oh, there's no evolution, there's only this. You go back to what you were. True, but in this way, not in the way it's taught. So it's fascinating how Sri Aurobindo takes and justifies every viewpoint. In justifying it, of course, it's not right the way they say it. But yes, there is something like that, but not quite that way. Okay, we come to the text now. Where then would be the temporary dwelling in the where then would the temporary dwelling in the supraphysical take place? What would be the soul's other habitat? Where you would go, so to say, to go home. It might seem that it ought to be on a mental plane, in mental worlds, both because on man, the mental being, the attraction of that plane, already active in life, must prevail when there is not the obstacle of the attachment to the body. And because the mental plane should be evidently the native and proper habitat of a mental being. So already as human beings, we are mental beings, so we should have a natural attraction to that. And by logic, at least, a mental being should be in a mental world. No, obviously. Why? But this does not automatically follow. Because of the complexity of man's being. And remember, complex in this case was this weaving of all the gradations into this blend. He has a vital as well as a mental existence. His vital part often more powerful and prominent than the mental. And behind the mental is a soul, of which it is the representative. So you have vital, mental, and then behind that the soul, of which the mental is the representative. So yes, we say we are mental beings. We are not primarily vital beings, but we have a stronger vital than a strong mental. And as mental being, also when you say I'm a mental being, your mental is a representative of soul. So you're now three different things. And what you will see in what follows is we actually go through, in a sense, the three stages, generally, broadly, but we'll see how not always. There are, besides, many planes or levels of world existence, and the soul has to pass through them to reach its natural home. So he's straight away telling you, yes, also there are other gradations within these, below these, and you have to go through all that to what may be called a natural home. There, of course, you don't worry about evolution, but if there's evolution, then these intermediate stages would be of relevance. In the physical plane itself, now he's going to list some of these other levels, or close to it, there are believed to be layers of greater and greater subtlety, which may be regarded as subplanes of the physical, with a vital and a mental character. These are at once surrounding and penetrating strata, layers, through which the interchange between the higher world and the physical world takes place. So now we have here extraordinary insight in just this very simple statement and the way it's articulated. So in the physical plane itself, and we are now talking of things which are tangible in this way, or close to it, there are believed to be layers of greater and greater subtlety, which may be regarded as subplanes of the physical, with a vital and a mental character. So you have subplanes, they have vital character, they have a mental character, but they are subplanes. They are not all belonging to one gradation. What does that mean really? It means if you shift from, let's give a few subplanes, each of these. If you shift from this subplane, which is the lowest, which is the one we have a biological body in, to one which is just the next one beyond that. When you are in that plane, you'll actually feel the same biological character of the body, but you might notice some difference. Somehow it is more conscious, more plastic, and with some other features, qualities of adaptability. You go higher up, it'll be greater subtlety. Again, you will touch, this is the same material. I'm convinced I'm in the physical world. But I notice somehow the body is much more plastic and subtle, and it feels like almost there's a glow around it. It even has the capacity to be almost spontaneously beautiful and aesthetic in a way that I have not seen in that crudest of the physical planes. You go a little up, and a little up, and a little up, and you see a certain plasticity and a certain beauty and even an ethereal sense, and the coarseness, crudeness, inertia becoming less and less. More of the vital characters and the features of the vital worlds, more of the features of the mental worlds, even elements of the spiritual influences being more and more fluidly, freely blending in. How many such subplanes? So in the Veda, we are taught there are 7 principles, each then becomes a plane in itself, but they are principles universally, cosmically present. So in each plane, all 7 are again represented. And the blending of these 2 principles now, the primary principle of the main plane, and the 7 others blending into it, actually 6, the 7 being the same one repeated, make for distinct 7 subplanes. And then within each of those subplanes, again, you have all 7 represented, which makes for a further variation of finer gradations. Now, when we were discussing with Mark, again, these are some of the things which I enjoy very much when I hear from him as confirmation. He says, I have experienced some of these planes of the physical, very similar to the physical. He has a different vocabulary. And then he says, I'm counting them. It seems like it's either 7 or 8. I'm not sure. Yes, I said, yeah, that's the way that says it's 7. He says, okay, that's it. But on his own, he finds the number is something like that. He's still figuring it out. Now, I've met people who had experiences spontaneously of being in one of these. I've also read literature from the remote viewing experiments which were done in the United States Navy. And some of these people had learned to go as if project out of the body and experience things from there of the physical world. So they were going out in the physical domain with a gradation which was very close to the physical. But then was a problem. Sometimes they would come back, they were convinced they had woken up in their physical body. They would get up and start moving around and doing things, and then suddenly they would find a situation which is completely outlandish, or something is odd. This wall has a different color. This door is not here, it should have been there. Some little tweak of a detail which is different. And they say, looks like I didn't really wake up. And then from that state, they would wake up again and come to the body, in their body, sleeping on the bed, and get up and say, now I'm finally awake. And it's so physical, so distinctly this physical world. They're convinced it is the case. They get up and walk around, and again, something is not okay. They wake up. It would happen sometimes once or twice. There's one case, one of the remote viewers described. He woke up multiple times. Each time he was convinced now this is the physical world. Finally, he checked, everything was exactly as it was. He went to a particular room and where somebody, one of his colleagues, was working, and the colleague was sitting there, and next to him was a bear sitting. He said, oh, this is not the physical world. And again, he had to force himself to wake up. Now, I'm giving this as an example to show you how material it is. So material that you have practically no way of distinguishing. You actually have to have a certain very fine intuitive discrimination to be able to distinguish between these gradations. So these are all domains of exploration, if you think about it. Our, so to say, human explorers going to the top of a mountain, going to the depth of the ocean, flying in outer space, it's almost like children playing in a kindergarten little sandpit. Great. But now start exploring these, just the subtle physical gradations of words. And maybe 7, and in each of those perhaps others. So what is it like? What is the relationship of this and that? So I'm again going to digress a bit, but you will understand the importance of these observations. And I don't think you'll find literature out there where these correspondences are made in the way I'm presenting here. There is one example which is documented of ET contact with human beings by Stevens. This is a US Air Force person who made about 64 books. Each was detailed investigation of some human contactee with some extraterrestrials. And they were all very different, sometimes from completely different cultures, planets, etc. Some of them were taken there, etc. Stevens, forget the full name. Something with William Stevens, or something with W. In one of these, he narrates how one person was taken to a planet of our solar system. And the planet had these beautiful buildings, large roads. And from the planet, through the telescope, he sees the Earth. And he describes how behind the Earth, there is a haze trailing behind. This, when he wrote or when he spoke of it, was not known to human beings. I think it happened in the 1950s or 60s, and subsequently with certain craft that we had put out, recording from a distance, we found that behind the Earth there's this trailing haze. Now the interesting part in that description was this person, when he was taken to that planet, now which planets would it be? It was in the inner orbit, so it could be either Venus or Mars. Unlikely to be Mercury because it is a big planet. Most likely Venus from the way he described it, but he was not sure which planet it was. And this was before NASA had said Venus is too hot. Okay, so these are roads and very sophisticated civilization, and he's taken there, he's shown all this, then he's brought back. Now the thing which is very interesting, while he's in this spaceship, he's told, look, we're going to put you to sleep because we're going to make a certain jump in quality of substance that you will find difficult to manage. So we're going to put you unconscious for a while, for a few seconds. They do something, he sees some light, he blanks out, and then he again comes back to consciousness. And they say, we made the jump, that's it. Nothing has changed for him. He goes to this planet. Again, on the return, they make this jump, and he comes to Earth. What was this jump? If you have seen some of Meyer, Swiss contactee, Billy Meyer, he describes how there is a particular group that comes from what he calls the Dal universe. And they say it is a universe like yours. It's a physical universe, but slightly offset, slightly different in vibration, of a different grade. And sometimes they use this word different dimension of. They are not dimensions. That's a very wrong use of the word dimension. Mathematically, a dimension is perpendicular. This is one dimension, two dimensions, third dimension will be perpendicular, and the fourth should be perpendicular to this. That's dimension. These are not dimensions, they are gradations of substance of the material world. So the Dal universe he speaks of is one of these. And this time we had this very interesting observation of Mark, where he actually said this when he was asked about his prior two planets of which he has recall of being. And one of those he said was the planet SS3, I think, where there are three suns. And he said, it's physical, it had a physical body, but then he says it's not this physical, it is a different grade of the physical. I said, that's interesting. Because he said that body was much more sophisticated, much more refined, much more capable. Yeah, that makes sense because it's a slightly finer grade of the physical world, but still physical. It has greater plasticity and able to have much more fluid and rapid evolution. You come to the coarsest grade of the physical, and there is when you hit the most rigid, difficult part of the physical evolution, let's say. Let's put it that way. But that distinction you come across repeatedly in various literature without understanding what it is they're talking about. Similarly, if you've seen Billy Meyer in one of the things, they make a jump, and they make a jump where they jump a great distance, for example, and something happens, they switch as if jumping a great distance, but there's a shift in vibrational grade. They go to a grade which is subtle physical, and at that point they go a great distance and then jump back to the gross physical. And that's the rapidest way of going across the universe, by not totally dematerializing, but shifting grade into a subtle physical grade. Their distance and speed are no more such big issues. And then you descend again that one grade. So all this actually represents a very advanced technology for us, but for them still very primitive and crude technologies, which our Earth science has not even conceived of. But I'm putting this spiritual description of the gradations in this context to show you that we have very objective descriptions of such things also coming from various kinds of sources. I'll give you another story which is commonly told to us. It was, I think, Ramana Maharshi who said that inside the mountain of Arunachala, he sees an entire city, and it's got street lights, it's got people. How is that possible? We hear stories also of people in the Himalayas having gone there, and they were taken into some cave, and there are all these nice rishis and all these people. Some of those are outright fantasy. Let's ignore that. But yes, there are some which are in this grade shifted subtle physical. Another example I give, the mother describing how cigar-shaped UFOs were seen in Switzerland at that time, 1960s. We have spoken of it long ago. And mother says, obviously subtle physical. Meaning those ships belonged to that one of those gradations of the physical, but not of this gross physical domain, which we find confirmed by some of these descriptions of the UFOs. But still, they're physical beings, physical technology, physical substance, but of those grades of physicality. So just to show you that the physicality of those physical domains is actually physical. It's not like too subtle like the vital or the mental. And sometimes you can't even make out which one you are in. And this is what he's speaking about. There are many planes or levels of world existence. So it's not an entire plane, but a grade, a level. And the soul has to pass through them to reach its natural home. In the physical plane itself, or close to it, there are believed to be layers of greater and greater subtlety, which may be regarded as subplanes of the physical. Not all, but as you go through them, with a vital and mental character. Now, what will happen as you go up the gradations, the vital and mental characteristics might get stronger because it's more fluid, so to say. In the coarsest of the physical where we are in, and this is the world we're living in, the vital and mental characters would be least visible, most dulled. And the biology itself then would be much more crude and struggling to evolve. These worlds, which are physical, these are at once surrounding and penetrating gradations, strata, through which the interchange between the higher worlds and the physical world takes place. So let's put it this way. The 7 principles we spoke of, and in the physical world, let's put the 7 principles and make them our subplanes. Each of those principles aligns with the world of its principle because it is the same principle, is in fact the same principle. Therefore, that world plugs into the physical through this gradation of substance corresponding to this principle. It's still physical, but with this dominating principle as a secondary power to the main principle of the physical world. That's your link. Equally, in those worlds, there would be the physical principle represented, and that would be the link from there also to the physical. And this is why you have actually a very rich weave, 7 planes, 7 in each plane. Let's put it at 49. Each of these now interlinked like this across worlds. That's the rich weave. And then actually everything is blending into each other. So you can't even just make straight lines. It's all fusing, blending, descending, rising. Staircases, ladders, regions where there is a dominance of this quality or that quality, which become like portals, literally. So you go into this space and you can as if tune in more easily to the vital world. You go into that place, you can tune in more easily to the mental worlds or this grade or that world or whatever powers. You see how it works in the physical world alone, but also in all other worlds. These are at once surrounding and penetrating strata, layers. And strata means clearly distinguished as layered one upon the other, through which the interchange between the higher worlds and the physical world takes place. Now, just this, if you review, you find so much insight and knowledge. And with it, a technology you can build. Because if you know this gradation, this substance is the link to the vital or the mental, I can create a technology which is physical and yet taps into the vital or the mental, receives imprints of your vital or mental influence on physical substance and responds to it with electronic, or acts on your vital mental with physical technology. You see how this works? Just this insight, if you can really decode and work upon and pursue from a technological perspective, you would have the most extraordinary advanced technologies which blend mind, vital, physical influences through material means. Okay. It might then be possible for the mental being, remember we're speaking of what happens after death, so long as its mentality is not sufficiently developed, so long as it is restricted mainly to the more physical forms of mind and life activity, to be caught and delayed in these media. So each of these is a medium, it's substance. As you are, so to say, discarding the gross physical and you pass through these gradations, you might find yourself caught and delayed. 2 words he uses. Caught meaning, hey, I'm unable to move, I'm stuck. Delayed meaning, as you move, something holds you back as if or slows you down, and there's a greater delay. You took a few days to cross this gradation through the subplanes of the physical. But what is it that would bind you? Although you're a mental being, why would you get stuck there? So long as the mentality is not sufficiently developed, this is your first condition. So then the mental influence is not strong enough to pull you through this fast. So please develop your mental powers, develop your mind powers, develop your mind consciousness, develop your mind individuality, organize your thoughts, make a beautiful, organized mental consciousness. Just the fact of having that, you will find you don't get stuck or dragged through these gradations. Because this is you more than that. This is first requirement. Second thing, it could happen, so long as mentality is not sufficiently developed, that is first reason. So long as it is restricted mainly to the more physical forms of mind and life activity. Look at the bulk of human life, which is obsessed with the physical activity of the mind and the life in its physical most forms. Look at what we do the whole day. Look at what are the primary drives of people, what are their primary ambitions, what are their primary dreams, what are their primary pastimes. It's all physical forms of mind activity, physical forms of life activity. How many actually stop and say, oh, my mind is so much more free than the physical form of it? Can I actually play with the domain of mind, ideas, conceptions, visualizations, etc.? Understanding, knowledge, or even in the vital. I am able to disconnect from, let's say, the vital, passionate attachment to a physical activity, or the physical activity which follows in vital passions and attachments, to a pure vital experience, which is what you would see, for example, in certain kinds of theater, where there's a cathartic shift, gradation, a refinement, lift. You experience the vital world or vital experiences in somebody else's life, but in a way that you feel lifted, or you participate in it in a way that frees you from your own narrow, crude, coarse layers of the vital passions by objectivizing outside you, by putting it in a controlled domain where you can actually experience what it's like to shift from this disturbance of passion to this refinement. I moved out and become free. Doing that in the setting of a theater is easier than doing that within your own life setting when you're overwhelmed by the disturbance and passion. So instead of wallowing in this, you find means to shift out, arise out, free yourself from the physical forms of mind activity or life activity into their more essential gradations and forms. And if you've worked on shifting in this way, lifting to their higher and freer forms, and then even developing that world, then you will naturally shift and drift to that level. You will not find yourself bound to these lower physical, subtle physical realms, neither delayed nor caught in them. But if all your life you have obsessed only of this physicality, and with your passion and desire or even thought only of the physical gradation and form, then when you quit the body, boof, that's where you hit. That's where you get stuck. That's where you identify and are delayed. Why is the delay important? Why not just say, hey, this is one of the many worlds. What does it matter? Because here you're not yourself. And the delay is costing you heavily from coming back to your own essential freedom and your soul's purpose in incarnating and preparing for the next incarnation. If you could rapidly go through these, you'll go through the vital worlds, the mental gradations, and eventually into the psychic world domain of psychic rest, preparing for the next incarnation. The sooner you get to that, the more free, happy, and yourself you are, but also you can prepare now for the work to be done. You could, of course, pass through these by conscious, deliberate choice and say, yeah, I want to explore this. That's a different story. But then you're not delayed, you're not caught. You're exploring, and that's acceptable. But so these two things, work upon it in your physical life. It might even be obliged to rest there entirely between birth and birth. Worst case, you're stuck there. You can't even go further between two births. But this is not probable and could only happen if and insofar as its attachment to the earth forms of its activity was so great as to preclude or hamper the completion of the natural upward movement. So you have a natural upward movement. Eventually, you will get pulled up and pass through those gradations. But if you had such a strong attachment to earth forms and activities that it would prevent that natural movement, then you might actually stay stuck there and incarnate from that gradation directly. And there are cases actually where people have such things and even sometimes memories of being in such things. For the For the post-mortal state of the soul must correspond in some way to the development of the being on earth, since this afterlife is not a free upward return from a temporary downward deviation into mortality, but a normal, recurrent circumstance which intervenes to help out the process of a difficult spiritual evolution in the physical existence. So, a longish sentence, but two very important things are being said here. The post-mortal state, that is, once you've quit the physical body, where you are, what gradation, what you do, must correspond in some way to the development of the being on earth. Yes, and this is obvious if you think of it this way. All our bodies, so to say, stacked up into each other and finally bound into the physical. You blow up the physical, what happens? They are still there as they were. So the state in which you were living in the physical life is the state in which you are, or in the equivalent gradation in which you live when the physical body is knocked out. Very simple, logically. So there is a correspondence of the state of consciousness in which you live your current life to what happens after. Some way correspondence, not an exact correspondence, because there's much greater flexibility there. When you're bound in the body, that flexibility has been reduced. And then second point, he says, this afterlife is not a free upward return from temporary downward deviation into mortality. It's not like I was here, I'm in some heavenly world, I have a temporary deviation to take birth, I finish the birth and pop, I'm back to my heavenly domain. You want to get to heaven, commit suicide, you'll be right there. No, it doesn't work like that. So it's not as if you had this fixed thing and you made a temporary downward deviation and you're back there. It does not work. It's rather a normal recurrent circumstance which intervenes to help out the process of a difficult spiritual evolution in the physical existence. In the physical existence, your spiritual evolution is very difficult, and you have a momentary reprieve from the physical body in order to be able to assemble and prepare yourself for the continuation of this work, to integrate and so on, things we've seen before. And it's a help in between, like a rest, before you continue with the work again of incarnating in the physical. So think of it this way. Unlike the common picture given, oh, you have heaven, you take birth on earth, you go back to heaven, come back to earth, go back to heaven, which is the wrong idea. Think of it this way: gradations of consciousness in the physical incarnation. You pop out into the equivalent gradation, rest, come back, and continue the overall evolution. Pop out at the level you were at, return to that grade, and rise again in evolution, and so on. This is more accurately descriptive of what happens after, when you leave the body and the relation. So you're actually part of the physical evolution, even in between, but in gradations of those worlds, but you belong to this domain of this physical evolution. Then the last part of this paragraph, there is a relation which the human being in his evolution on earth develops with higher planes of existence. And that must have a predominant effect on his internatal dwelling in these planes. It must determine his direction after death and determine to the place, period, and character of his self-experience there. So, as human beings in our normal evolution on earth, we develop relationship with higher planes of existence. For example, the vital world is a higher plane than the physical, right? So even having vital experiences belongs to something slightly higher, but not quite the higher where you have a freedom. It's still in the domain that Mark refers to as the swamp, where desire is the dominant theme. But in the higher vital, for example, already it's much greater. There you already have heavens of the vital. Then you have the mental consciousness, and people who live in the mind and the mental worlds are naturally have a strong relation with the mental domain. And there are higher spiritual ranges. And if you've actually worked upon those gradations of consciousness to some degree, you've built familiarity with those, their influence is active in you in your physical incarnation, then after you leave the physical body, those influences would be strong determinants of the direction after death, the place, period, how long you stay, and the character of your self-experience there. Self-experience is the way you experience yourself. Okay, it's a very important idea, just this one key phrase. As you go through these different worlds, it's not just the world that changes, it's your experience of yourself that changes. And what is that? It corresponds to the thing which is the grade in which you are in. So if you have read some of the literature of people going out of the body, you go into these lower worlds of the lower vital, the hells, and everything is dull, heavy, inertia, dark, dusky, gray colors. You don't have bright colors. Everything is heavy. Everything moves slowly. Even to make a movement of your body, it's like you're pushing lead through, or the air itself, you're pushing through the air in slow movement. and you are full of inertia. Everything is, even your mind and vital are dulled down, etc. Those are the so-called, which we would call the hells. You move into the slightly higher realm of the vital and you say, oh, here I'm floating, I'm light, I'm free, so nice. But you are a creature of desire. I'm passionate, I'm intense in desire. You go slightly into the higher domains of the higher vitals, your desires are there, but they're large, vast. I want to explore, I want to conquer, I want to enjoy the world, not in a personal way. It's a desire still, but a large desire that wants to embrace the universe. And it's a different quality of yourself that you experience. If you were to go into the mental, similar changes, but eventually, who are you truly? And eventually, you will go into the psychic. That's when you will truly know yourself as you truly are, as the being who incarnates and the immortal person who's a part of the divine consciousness. So your sense of self experience changes. The character of his self experience changes. Period of his self experience changes, how long you're there, which depends. So if you're in the hells, you'll feel as if you're there for a very long time. Sometimes you may feel as if you're stuck there for centuries. Or the place where you go to. So place, period, character of self experience are determined along with the direction of your drift by the relationship that you develop with the higher planes of existence while in the earth evolution. So again, practically what this means is, in your earth evolution, please develop deeper, higher, more complete, freer relationships with the ranges of consciousness of your own inmost psychic being's influence, and then of course ranges of the higher vital, higher mental refinement, evolution, growth into the more beautiful, more light, more clear, more fresh, more free, more wide, and from there into the spiritual ranges to whatever extent you can. The moment you've done this basic upward turn in your physical life, it will reflect itself in the basic upward turn in post life. And this could easily be made part of our basic educational refinement. I've been off and on when I look at movies. It's interesting to see what gradation the theme of the movie is holding and where it pulls you, the world that it's exploring. And sometimes you find these are, they could be heroism, but the grade of life presented is so crude and coarse, so narrow in its binding into material forms. Somebody, for example, a theme of a movie of revenge. You're going to sacrifice your entire life just to kill the one person to avenge whatever it is, doesn't matter what. And even if it's heroic and great and grand achievement in your revenge, the theme of revenge itself is so petty, narrow, and binding to form. So crude and coarse even. And you can, when I look at, when you watch movies, do it in this way. What's the overall theme? Where is it really coming? Where is it hitting you, pulling you to? What is it aggrandizing, exaggerating, intensifying? And you'll notice how much of this is so crude, low. Some of the greatest award-winning movies might be of that grade. If in our education we were given the strong upward turn from the beginning in all our parts, mental, vital, physical, in all the different motivations and drives which we have, then obviously at the point when you leave the body, this overall upward turn would be the stronger influence. So I'll end with this. There is a relation which the human being in his evolution on earth develops with higher planes of existence. And that must have a predominant effect on his internatal between births, dwelling on these planes. This relation must determine his direction after death, direction, place, and determine to the place, period, and character of his self-experience there. Upon this, we have not spoken of not just higher planes, but higher beings and the divine consciousness. And obviously then the influence of the Divine Mother's help when you leave the body. It's a whole different change altogether, isn't it? If you find the Divine Mother herself reaches out to you and draws you and takes you into the highest or inmost worlds that for you would be natural, bypassing all this clutter and confusion in the passage. That would be the best if you have built that relationship. And then at the time when you have to leave the body, you cling to that relationship and make that the link, isn't it? So I give that example. I'm coming back to the example I gave when I was put under general anesthetic. I'd prepared myself to tune in and connect to the mother and Sri Aurobindo and stay with them. Just as I was about to be put under general anesthetic, the nurse says, I'm going to put oxygen on you now. And I say, yes. And my mind flips to this and the curiosity, oh, is this oxygen? Is this a mix of what? I don't know what it is. Oof, that's when it got knocked out. I missed that entry point. As you're about to leave the body, hey, what about that guy who gave me so much trouble? He needs a good knock. I wish I could have given him a vengeance. What about that packet of money that I've hidden behind, buried under some tree or hidden in some safe? Did I remember to give the safe secret number to? And the whole turn of consciousness goes to something quite obviously that's not the whole of you, but still, one of the things you're taught in most of the religious traditions is the last time as you're about to leave, let all your awareness one pointedly dwell on the divine. Then you have the most easy, the most natural, the most smooth transition into the deeper and higher realms of these worlds. But then there's more. In that transition, what are the gradations? What are the stages? So that's the next paragraph where he says he may linger in time in these annexes of the other worlds created by your beliefs before you actually experience the world in itself. So it's another paragraph with a lot of interesting insights, which we will take up next Saturday. But you see how each paragraph he's preparing you logically, structuring logically, and then layering them, sequencing them until you have the full picture in a grand, very complex weave in which all possibilities are understood, but on the basis of certain essential and limited principles around which this whole working takes place. And that's the brilliance of Sri Aurobindo, the way he articulates the knowledge in this way, rather than saying, oh, this is what happens to most people, but there can be any number of variations. He gives you the schema which determine what happens and how it happens. Understanding that, you can understand all the variations. And looking at a person, looking at yourself, you will know what would be the broad trajectory of your journey, isn't it? Or what you could do to change that trajectory. Very practical, very important. And so this is the work we have to do in our life as we are now. Not just for the afterlife, but that's part of our evolution. In a sense, what happens after is a reflection of what's happening now. So it's a measure in a sense. But let's do that now itself. And the more you're able to do this now, all the layers within you, in the physical consciousness, where they're all bound together, all grow, all get pulled up, all evolve because of the binding in matter. So with the given effort, the growth here is 7x more than if you made the effort in other planes, where you would just grow for that much for that plane. And for each of the planes or gradations, you'd have to grow with separate efforts. Here in a single effort, you get a 7x or more, perhaps 49, depending on all the gradations involved, multiplier effect. And that's why we chose to incarnate, among other reasons, but this is one of the main reasons for the rapid evolution that it provides for the spiritual. And most importantly, in its consequence, the linking of the material with the highest spiritual of which we are a part, children of immortality, as the Veda will say. So as children of immortality, we enter the domain of the negation of immortality and establish the rule of immortality here on earth, in the physical world, in the physical body, a divine life. That's why we are here. Let's meditate on this theme and the work we have to do.